Every day, every single day, things are happening in the world of deals and deal makers. And there's never enough time to keep up with every company, transaction, announcement, or whatever. It's just exhausting. And we have a new product to help fix that. This is Axios Pro Deals, a new premium subscription product bringing you tailor-made insights like never before. For the last 5 years, Axios has helped deal professionals navigate the whole deal landscape with Pro Rata. With Axios Pro Deals, we're diving deeper into the industries that matter most to you. You just want stories on fintech? There's a newsletter for that. MedTech deals? We've got you covered. The future of retail? We'll guide you. With Axios Pro Deals, you're going to be getting all of this industry-specific insight and expert analysis at a level you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're a venture capitalist, private equity investor, banker, trader, founder, executive, anyone who cares about deals, Axios Pro is what you need to help you understand what matters and why. Start your free trial today at AxiosPro.com.
Hi there, welcome to our virtual event on the current state of crypto. I'm Brady Dale, crypto reporter at Axios, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. And welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. So if you want to join the conversation today, come on to Twitter with @Axios, AXIOS, and hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague, Lucinda Shin, and we'll examine what's next for cryptocurrency regulation. And make sure to subscribe to my new Axios crypto newsletter, which just launched last week. To sign up, go to axios.com/newsletters. Our first guest is J.W. Verret. He's a law professor at George Mason University and a former member of the SEC Investor Advisory Committee. Hello, Professor Verret. How you doing?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you too. Good to meet you. So let's start really big on this conversation. President Biden released an executive order on cryptocurrency for a bunch of agencies last month, but it seemed like the SEC, for its part, was already well underway on dealing with cryptocurrencies. So did the executive order change anything for what the SEC is doing on this issue?
I don't think the executive order changed anything with respect to the SEC. I think the chairman of the SEC has a pretty good idea what he wants to do. I think it has probably more significance for other regulatory agencies and other executive departments that maybe weren't as focused on cryptocurrency previously. For example, the Department of Commerce has a component in the executive order. But no, I think Gary Gensler knows exactly what he wants to do, and he's going to use this executive order maybe to give him cover for what he sort of planned to do anyways, my surmise.
So I spent the last few years in crypto-specific publications. So I was, sort of deeply embedded with crypto folks, all the time. And I know that the whole industry, Bitcoin launched out of the Great Recession of 2008, and it was viewed as a response to what they felt was, a financial system that wasn't serving regular people. And I guess a lot of them wonder now, why is there so much focus on this new industry that's relatively small when we have a pretty good sense that there's still plenty of bad activity in the traditional financial markets, but it seems like all the attention is on crypto right now. Why do you think that is?
I think that governments are trying to figure out what to do with crypto. And on the one hand, they're always afraid of something new and afraid of something unregulated. But the Treasury Department and certainly anti-money laundering regulators around the world have understood that Bitcoin, for a few years now, the Bitcoin and other blockchains with pseudonymous transactions are easily traceable for organizations. It's much easier to trace drug money through a blockchain than it is to trace cash. So they're understanding that. I think that political organs of the government are starting to understand that that blockchain can provide cheaper remittances to third world countries from immigrants in developed nations, can more cheaply remit money back. It can have implications for access to financial services for the unbanked and such. So I think they're starting to come around, but not all of them are coming around. And some of them are just sort of see everything in the cookie cutter view of, oh, this will be just like the '08 crisis. It's some new financial instrument, therefore we should regulate it. When it's really something very different. But I am glad you referenced that the first Bitcoin blockchain transaction had a reference to the Chancellor of the Exchequer's bailout. It certainly does have its roots in a remedy to the financial crisis, and I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and so let's talk about minds changing regulatorily.
Invented a word.
The Bitcoin ETF has been a hot topic for a long time. How big does, and as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the argument against a Bitcoin ETF sort of allowing people in their brokerage accounts to own Bitcoin, through a publicly traded instrument. The argument against it has mainly been the market's too small and it's too easy to manipulate. The market's now 3 times bigger than it was when the Winklevoss brothers first proposed an ETF in 2017. How big do you think it needs to get before it's big enough for a spot Bitcoin ETF?
I think it's already big enough. And if the SEC were judging the Bitcoin spot ETF applications by the same metric they've used in the past for other ETF applications, they would have approved it already in the same way that Canada has, in the same way that Germany has, in the same way I expect Australia will eventually. And so I think we're just behind other comparable nations. And it would be nice if the SEC said, look, here's what's required in order to obtain full approval. It's also interesting, the SEC recently approved a futures ETF application that is based in a 33 Act and not a 40 Act. And that way, Gensler has already crossed a red line that he previously said he wouldn't cross with respect to Bitcoin ETFs. That gives a lot more wind behind the sails of folks like Grayscale and other applicants for Bitcoin ETFs. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Can you explain that red line? Because I don't even understand it. I did read some about this morning and I couldn't follow it. What is that red line that he crossed?
Yeah, so he said that he was not. One of the problems with the prior ETF application is that it would be approved under the 33 Act. It wouldn't include all the strictures that are included under 40 Act classifications, essentially mutual fund regulation, which are a lot stronger in terms of the sort of paternalistic approach the SEC takes to regulation of those ETFs. So in that sense, it's a red line he previously said he wouldn't cross. That brings us closer, that whittles away some of the arguments he's had against spot ETFs. If he's willing to approve.
So the previous one, previously, they just, sorry to cut you off, but just so we get it, the previous Bitcoin ETFs, because a few have been approved, they're all in the futures market, but they were under a more strict set of rules. And this most recent one is under a slightly looser set of rules. That's what you're saying?
Exactly right. And that looks a lot more like a spot ETF would under the 33 Act. It would be nice if he said, look, here's the size I need to see, here's the market surveillance I need to see, here's the anti-manipulative safeguards I need to see before I will approve it. He hasn't said that. All he says is they're not enough. But when you look back to other ETFs that have been approved in the past, there have been some pretty shady ones that have been approved that are essentially negative net present value prospects at inception, and the SEC approved them anyway. So I think it's time.
So you made an interesting comment in a story in The Hill not too long ago that I hoped you'd unpack. We all know that a lot of these rules around who can and can't participate in the crypto markets have to do with investor protection. That we hear about accredited investors a lot. Basically, you have to be rich enough that you can handle the risk. You made the comment that you didn't, and I think a lot of people think because crypto is so volatile, sort of setting scams and things like that aside, just because it's volatile, we need to have investor protections because things swing wildly and people understand that. you said volatility isn't enough of a reason to slap a bunch of rules on. Could you unpack that some more? Because it's an interesting take.
Well, I think there's all sorts of products that have been approved previously that are highly volatile. I mean, you can. Well, first of all, let's step outside of investment, right? Gambling is legal for anyone to do once you reach the age of 18. So let's start with that.
Okay.
Volatility alone is not a reason to prohibit someone access to a possible investment. A volatility can if your volatility is different from the volatility of the rest of the market, uncorrelated volatility, then adding that to your portfolio makes the rest of your portfolio safer. So I don't think that's any reason to prohibit someone access to investment, which has been the SEC's approach in a lot of ways. What I've been arguing for in my digital asset regulation Genesis block proposal of the SEC is start from scratch for digital assets. Let's have a new regime. Let's have some standardized disclosures that represent the kind of things crypto investors need, which are not accounted for currently in the SEC's rules, like how the smart contracts are audited, what are the tokenomics of how the tokens will be distributed going forward to developers and the rest of the community, how they were distributed pre-purchase, pre-access to the public. And I think those things would be more useful than what's on the books right now.
Yeah, it would be really interesting if there was some kind of, we have if you get a mortgage, you get like a truth in lending disclosure that's kind of standardized and it's easy to read. It would be great if there was something like that came out for, the tokenomics of new crypto projects.
Yeah, and there are already crypto lawyers trying to write up ideas for that and trying to write into the SEC, but the SEC is just not willing to engage yet.
Yeah. So do you think there's a chance that we're going to see action from Congress that sort of, causes them to jump the line and move forward?
I think I'm very excited right now about the bill that Senator Lummis is putting together in partnership with Senator Gillibrand of New York. It's a bipartisan bill. It's a nonpartisan bill on crypto regulation, and it's going to include a lot of ideas. And even if it doesn't pass this Congress or the next Congress, I think it's a palette onto which a lot of us can paint what we'd like to see, and that will give the SEC some help if they're willing to listen. But the tide is definitely shifting on crypto and the crypto discussion in Congress, and that changes the tone of the regulators even when legislation doesn't pass, because because regulators listen very closely, especially to the Senate, right? Because regulators get appropriated by the Senate. If they want a different job in regulation or a different department, they listen very carefully to the Senate because they have to get confirmed later by the Senate. So that discussion is going to be helpful even if a bill doesn't pass.
Thank you, Professor Verret. This has been great. Thanks a ton for talking to us. Obviously, we'll keep covering these things on Axios Crypto, so follow along there. And up next, we have The View from the Top with Chris Freites.
Thanks, Brady, and thank you to our sponsor, Ripple, for making this conversation possible. And joining me now is the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse. Brad, welcome to Axios.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I want to start out, tell me a little bit about Ripple. What is it?
Ripple is an enterprise blockchain company, and we sell technologies starting with financial institutions, banks, payment providers to solve a cross-border payments problem. Banks and financial enterprises in general spend a lot of money, and it's a slow, cumbersome process to move money cross borders. It's expensive, it's slow. Many of us have had that experience. Our view is you can use internet-based technologies to massively improve that experience, make it instant, and make it very, very low cost.
And when you talk about moving money, of course, you're talking about regulation. So I wonder, what do you think policymakers need to do to provide that regulatory certainty that companies like Ripple need to continue to grow?
It's a really important question. And I think certainly for Ripple, and I think a lot of the actors who are playing in the blockchain and crypto space, you have people who want to work with governments and work with regulators, but you have to have that clarity as you described. And without that clarity, you're kind of navigating with uncertainty, and it discourages investment. And it certainly discourages investment here in the United States. The US, by comparison to other leading G20 markets, has really been behind the 8 ball in providing that clarity about how they're going to regulate and how they're going to look at digital assets. This is so much the case that recently the Biden administration issued an executive order calling for the US government to come together to provide that, and called for a series of steps. And it's a summary of what Ripple anyway has been saying for years, that without that clarity, without that certainty, more and more of the leadership in this critical new industry will go overseas. And that's actually what you've seen happen in the recent years.
And you're talking about the US losing some of its market share to other countries stepping up. What countries do you see that are putting in regulatory certainty? What kind of policies are out there that you think the US should emulate from other countries? What countries are doing a good job with this?
A few markets that I would highlight, and again, these are major economies. These aren't, smaller markets that might have invested more in a leading enterprise. This is, the UK, Japan, Singapore, even the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East has provided that clarity, and they provided leadership that, again, as I said, allows investors, allows entrepreneurs to come into these businesses, to come into these markets and build new technologies on a next generation technology framework. I think the US way back in the late 90s provided that clarity and certainty as it related to the internet we use today, and it allowed the US to thrive and be a leader in how the internet grew. I think that same opportunity exists today as it relates to blockchain and crypto, and so far the US has been a laggard when they could be a leader.
And you see that with multiple industry players calling for legislation to clarify this crypto regulatory landscape. And that includes designating the CFTC, not the SEC, to be the primary regulator. Why is that? What's that about, Brad?
Well, I think the SEC is, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're the SEC, everything looks like a security. And they have said, hey, we think many of these are securities, but they're not providing the clarity about why it's a security, which ones are security. The current administration at the SEC won't answer even a question like, is ETH the second most valuable digital asset? Is it a security? It's just very difficult to operate in a market where you don't have that certainty. The CFTC, I think, is much better equipped. The Commodities Futures Trading Commission is much better equipped to regulate these markets because these digital assets are much more akin to commodities and currencies. And the CFTC has provided great oversight. The idea, as the current chair of the SEC has expressed, that the crypto industry is the Wild West, I just think is a red herring. It's a false narrative.
And the SEC and Ripple in a little bit of a dispute right now. The SEC's suing Ripple. What is that dispute about at its heart here, Brad?
It gets to the core of exactly the topic we're talking about here. Ripple uses as native to our technology stack a digital asset called XRP. XRP is very similar to Bitcoin or ETH in that it's decentralized, it's open source technology. And the SEC has alleged, despite our clarity with them over many years, that we're using XRP in our payment flows. The SEC has alleged that our sales of XRP represent securities in the sale of securities, unregistered securities offerings, both for Ripple and actually even for me personally, the XRP that I have sold. So I think it's very clear that when you buy XRP, you're not getting right title ownership or have governance rights over Ripple, the company. These are any more so than you buy ETH, do you get ownership over Consensus, a leading company in the Ethereum ecosystem. So we think it's very clear. The SEC obviously feels differently. The good news is there's a judicial process which certainly has exposed a lot of important information about this. And I think ultimately we'll get the clarity we seek. It's just unfortunate it has to come through a judicial process, and it's called regulation by enforcement is not a path to having the US as a leader in the blockchain industry.
And Brad, we have just about a minute left here. So quickly, what's the one thing you would say policymakers could do in 15 seconds? How would you, what can they do to make this landscape better?
I think the number one thing they could do, there's a piece of legislation in the House and there's stuff developed in the Senate as well called the Digital Commodities Exchange Act. This would provide a lot more clarity than where we are today, and I think would help the whole industry in the United States.
That's Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse. Brad, thank you for joining Axios.
Thanks for having me.
And now over to Axios FinTech reporter, Hussein Deshem.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Lucinda Shen. I'm a fintech reporter for Axios. Our final guest is Executive Director of Coin Center, Jerry Brito, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. It's obviously a very topical one right now as crypto becomes more important than ever. So, Jerry, you sit, Coin Center in particular sits in a very unique position. It's been around since 2014. It is one of the earliest organizations to advocate for crypto and directly communicate with Washington, D.C. And so having that breadth of experience and that history, I am curious, when you're comparing the current administration to past ones, how friendly is the current one to crypto innovation and to the development of this industry?
That's a good question. I think it's friendlier and less friendly on different margins, right? I'd say, the last administration, I think, was very hands-off until the very end. And so the fact that it was hands-off and let agency experts kind of lead the way, allowed for some friendliness. At the very end, they took some actions that were pretty hostile. This administration is kind of leaning in, as we can see from the executive order. And so, in some respect, that's good. I don't know if that's friendly or not, but certainly they're saying this industry, this ecosystem matters, it's serious, and we need to take it seriously. And so it's a good opportunity for everyone to put their best foot forward.
Right. And when you say the industry, the final parts of the last administration was more hostile, what do you mean by that?
Oh, in particular, I'm thinking of at the very end of the administration after the election, the Treasury Department, in particular, sort of kind of of personal interest of Secretary Mnuchin, issued a last-minute rulemaking that would have, among other things, really regulated software that people run on their own computers for hosting their own cryptocurrency, right? And that was done kind of, in a last-minute sort of push after the election. So it was kind of like a midnight rulemaking. It was done in a very abbreviated time, and it was done without any consultation. So that's what I mean by last minute sort of hostile. When this administration came in, and by the way, there was a big sort of pushback by us in the community that was able to make sure that that regulation did not come into place during the last administration. So when this administration came in, they have put a pause on that, and that's where it still stands, kind of as a pause. And I think, quite honestly, I think if you were to ask the professionals at Treasury, at FinCEN, who deal with anti-money laundering, they don't think that kind of thing is necessary. So that really came from the political class in the last administration, not from really a felt need from the relevant experts in Treasury.
That's really fascinating. I mean, we've seen this happen, not even in the last administration, right? But this last minute rulemaking changes in proposals for crypto that really come out of nowhere and have these wider effects. More recently, the SEC, for example, around DeFi, they added some word in proposed rulemaking that could have a wider impact, even though it didn't say the word DeFi, that would impact DeFi. And I'm curious, when you are seeing these kinds of changes, the last minute changes, that do you think that those are a result of ignorance? Do you think that's kind of a deliberate decision on the rulemaker's side?
No, I think that when that happens, and this happened, you're right, with much more frequency lately, it's a result of the fact that regular order really isn't respected very much in DC these days. So there have been any number of policy proposals that have come through over the last 10 years that we've been working on this, where it goes through, what I consider to be regular order, which is, there's a Hill staffer who has an idea, brings it to their boss. They begin to bring in different stakeholders and bat around the idea. You are able to give input there. Ultimately, maybe there's a draft bill that gets shared with different people. You can give input into that. Ultimately, there's a bill introduced. There are hearings, right? And through that whole process, you're able to spot unintended consequences. You're able to point out pitfalls. Folks appreciate that kind of input, and you get a good product by the end. And the same happens in different agency processes. What ends up happening, however, is that Congress these days only gets things done in these massive omnibus bills that get rammed through at any particular time, right? So most recently with the infrastructure bill, we saw a proposal for a different kind of tax provisions related to cryptocurrency that was added at the last minute, and with a sort of clear, deadline by which that bill is going to get passed one way or another. And there was no opportunity for folks to give input. And so that's the reason that you have these last minute things, is because the way things get done these days is big omnibus things that have to be rushed through. Same thing with the Mnuchin midnight rule, right? They could see they were having to leave office in less than 30 days, so they tried to ram that through. If things go through a regular process, usually you get a good outcome. Even if it's not a perfect outcome of what you would have wanted, you're able to give input, right? So I think that's the reason why you have these things sort of pop up. With the SEC's current rulemaking, and comments are due this week actually, and we're filing there. Technically, they've done it by the book. They did only give 30 days comment period, which is a lot less than typical. But in any event, they've so far gone through the regular process. Now, what we'll wait to see is how much to heart are they going to take our comments, right? In our comment letter that we'll be filing, we'll be pointing out that in large part, the section of the bill that would deal with DeFi is unconstitutional under First Amendment grounds. And if it were to become a final rule as written, it would surely be challenged in court. So it'll be interesting to see how much to heart and they'll take that comment and make changes.
Yeah, we'll see. And going back to that point on unintended consequences, and I'm curious, right, going back to even when you guys first started, when Coin Center first started their efforts with Washington, there really weren't that many crypto-focused lobbyists around. Now there's an explosion of them. It seems like everywhere you turn, there's someone with government affairs in their title, in the crypto world at least. And so when you're on the ground now, and you're not the only one out there speaking to folks in Congress, you're not the only one speaking to folks who are regulators, does it help or does it muddy the message that you're trying to deliver when there's so many different when there's so many lobbyists on the ground?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the good news for Coin Center is that we still occupy a unique spot that there isn't another one like us. So Coin Center is not a trade association. We don't represent anybody. We're very much more akin to something like the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the Center for Democracy and Technology. So we are a civil liberties group that is looking after the rights of people to write software, to use that software to connect peer-to-peer, and to do so privately, right? So those are basically your First and Fourth Amendment rights related to use of the software. And really, the explosion that we've seen lately is as the industry has exploded, you have, every company now has a DC representative, and you have various trade associations. And so you're right. On the one hand, it's super useful to have more allies where our interests align. We can collaborate and work well together on different issues. But at the same time, you did have a big explosion in a very short period of time. And so you have a lot of folks who are sort of government affairs professionals who maybe don't have an extensive crypto background coming in. And that does, muddy the waters, but I think that'll be sorted out, right? I think people will get up to speed and we'll get better results soon.
So basically everyone's confused right now, which is, I guess, good for for somebody. I am curious, right? Crypto is sitting in this really interesting space right now. We've seen hacks, we've seen gigantic hacks. It's hard for me to think of a massive crypto crackdown in the recent months. Do you anticipate one is coming?
So not related to the hacks, right? So if you think about it, what these hacks I think show is that the big custodial regulated firms, right, that most consumers would use to interact with cryptocurrency networks have never suffered these kind of hacks, right? So I'm thinking about the Coinbases, Krakens, Geminis of the world. They've never experienced something like this, and they're regulated. They are eager to improve on what those regulatory obligations are, et cetera. So there's that. You also haven't seen the major networks ever be hacked, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum have not been hacked as a network. So what you have is hacks of different smart contracting applications and the like. And so I don't think that is amenable to regulation, per se. Or at least there isn't any regulation on the book right now that could be used for a crackdown, other than the SEC in particular, looking at some of these projects and determining, what form have they taken? Are they securities? If so, then yeah, enforcement actions would probably be in order. And you're right, I have been surprised at the SEC for so much rhetoric that we've seen out of this, out of this SEC in this administration. There have been relatively few enforcement actions. So
Yeah.
You would expect more, but I keep waiting and I don't see any.
Obviously, I would love to continue this conversation, but we are out of time. So thank you so much for joining us. Clearly, we should be looking out for potentially more regulation, potentially more efforts from the SEC, but for now, it looks like a wait and see game. Thank you again, Jerry, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more info or to sign up for the brand new Axios crypto newsletter, visit axios.com/newsletters or the Axios app. For a fintech deep dive, you can sign up for Axios Pro at axios.com/pro. Thank you all again for joining us, and we'll see you on axios.com.